This is our low-impact transient cyber asset and removable media malicious code risk mitigation presentation. I challenge you to say that 10 times fast. We'll turn the time over now to Jennifer Salisbury and Tyler Whiting.
Thank you, Maylee. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Really looking forward to talking about TCAs and RM, but just wanted to do a quick introduction of ourselves. For those who don't know me already, my name is Tyler Whiting. I've been with WEC about 9 years now. I'm a senior compliance auditor, and my specialty is in SIP. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you. I have about 11 years experience in the industry, and out of those 11 years, 6 of them have been as a cybersecurity auditor, specializing in change management and vulnerability assessments associated with SIP 10 and SIP 3 Section 5. Next. Today's agenda for this session, we're going to cover the following topics related to the NERC reliability standard requirement for SIP 3 version 8, attachment 1, section 5. We are going to review some of the NERC glossary of terms you're going to see within that within section 5 for transient cyber assets and removable media. And from here on out, transient cyber assets are going to be considered TCAs, so I don't get tongue-tied. We're going to step into the cybersecurity plan requirements and some of the most common methods used for managing TCAs and removable media. Then we're going to move into some examples of implementation artifacts and provide you folks with some recommendations to strengthen your organization's security posture for managing and using TCAs and removable media. Next. So the first term that we have here is SIP exceptional circumstances, and this is specific to section 5 only. If you're not familiar with this term and you have low impact cyber systems, go get familiar with it. What this does is it affords compliance exceptions to the entity's implementation of its cybersecurity plan for TCAs and removable media, you know, if it meets these circumstances, but technically we see it in emergencies. It's meaning if any of these circumstances should occur and your TCA or your removal media plan can't be implemented as documented, you as an registered entity can declare a CEC without being in violation of the standard requirement. Now, if you do declare SIP exceptional circumstances, a CEC, it should be well documented and presented during a compliance monitoring activity right up front. Because remember, we're going to look at you, we're going to assess if we see something wrong, we're going to ask, and then you'll pull out hopefully you have your CEC documentation, and it'll substantiate why we're seeing that issue there. So when an entity declares a CEC, we typically see post-mitigation efforts being conducted after that circumstance or emergency, such as scanning the system or environment that device was connected to for malicious code, and also scanning the device as well for malicious code. Next. Removable media. This is pretty transparent, pretty simple, but we typically see these as USB flash drives used for obtaining or storing backup system configurations. We also see USB flash drives used to store application updates to the bed cyber systems in conjunction with a transient cyber asset. Next. All right, transient cyber assets. These are typically laptops. They're used to perform maintenance, testing, vulnerability assessments on bed cyber systems and associated equipment. And they're typically used by your organization's employees, contractors, and vendors. But the most important thing to remember when you're managing removable media or transient cyber assets is ensuring that they're not connected for longer than 30 consecutive calendar days. Otherwise, they're going to be considered part of your system, and they have to be afforded the applicable SIP standard requirements. Why? Because they're really intended for short-term use only. And it's up to your organization to specify what activity that those TCAs and removable media are going to be performing. Next. So here we have a Slido question. There's no right or wrong answer here. We just want to get a pulse on if your organization allows the use of transient cyber assets or removable media to connect to your low impact bed cyber systems, or if the folks on the phone have high or medium, we want to know that too. Okay, so about, just still moving just a little bit. We'll give it a little bit more time. All right, so 60% said yeah. For those that are not sure, the recommendation is to go back to your organization and find out if you are using transient cyber assets or removable media to connect to your bed cyber systems. For those who answered no as a 25%, stay tuned, because we do have some stuff for you, even though you don't allow it. All right, next. So for the cybersecurity transient cyber asset plans, it's very flexible for the entity to choose what methods it needs to implement. Kind of going back to what Brady said, it's really dependent on, maybe how many low impact cyber systems you have and what type of methods that you need to deploy there, but it's very flexible. But whatever method your organization is choosing, it's got to be documented in the plan. Even if those methods change, update your plan. This is one of those standards where it allows the flexibility for you to develop the plan, choose your methods, but whatever you've got, whatever your plan says and it's documented, we're going to expect to see that those methods have been deployed pursuant to your plan. Additionally, the management of transient cyber assets, as you see there, for ongoing, on-demand, should also be documented in your plan. This is going to help make sure that your plan is sustainable and it's repeatable, and that those methods are being afforded consistently. Next. All right, management of TCAs. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. There's not a lot of information on the slide, but we're going to spend some time here. Transient cyber assets managed by your organization in an ongoing manner are kind of considered a plug-and-play device, right? Because the methods should be continuously being afforded and monitored. So for example, for ongoing TCAs, there should be a patch management program for operating system security updates, the antivirus application, including those signatures and patterns. And we typically see a group policy object deployed on those TCAs to enforce the security settings and to protect against unauthorized access and other security threats. So an ongoing TCA, you're constantly updating that transient cyber asset. You're getting monitoring reports, you're getting logs that security patches have either been installed or they failed, and you're taking action on those failed updates, even if they're signatures and patterns, because basically your organization, again, here is trusting that the device has no vulnerabilities or malicious code prior to connecting to a bed cyber system. So for TCAs managed in an on-demand manner, your organization is considering those devices not trusted, meaning that they have to have some type of review done prior to that device connecting to your bed cyber system. And that should be done in accordance to your plan. So if your entity allows TCAs managed by a party other than your organization to connect to a bed cyber system, here again, The transient cyber asset, and this will be your vendors, typically your vendors or your contractors' laptop that they're bringing to your facility to connect to your system. You want to make sure that they're meeting the security objectives to mitigate the introduction of malicious code prior to them connecting to your system. And that should also be documented in your plan on how you are managing third-party TCAs. So on a closing remark on this slide, due to the increased threats with ransomware and the shift of everybody kind of moving over to a zero trust environment, your entity may want to consider deploying deploying a hybrid method for managing TCA use, meaning that the transient cyber assets would be managed in an ongoing manner. They're receiving those security updates, they're secure, but you're also doing a check before those transient cyber assets are being connected, providing that trust but verify concept. Next. Here we're going to talk a little bit about the methods that we typically see entities using specific to low impact bed cyber systems. So your organization may reduce the risk of malicious code by prohibiting the use of removable media and transient cyber assets altogether. However, this doesn't mean the statement in your plan is going to be sufficient. The plan should describe the methods that you're going to use to prevent and deter the use of removable media or transient cyber assets. This could be port blockers, signage, or maybe some other technical controls. Maybe your organization is further along in technology and you have something set up where as a consultant or a vendor or maybe one of your employees can come in and remote into that facility and do the maintenance and testing, or do some upgrades to the security updates to the relays or whatever equipment associated with your bed cyber system. Next. So TCAs managed by your organization. So these are the devices that you have classified as transient cyber assets that you are managing. And then here again, your organization has the flexibility to decide the appropriate methods to use, such as deploying antivirus software and managing the updates of the signatures or patterns. You could be using application whitelisting, making sure that no other applications are being installed, and other methods, right? So here's where this flexibility really comes in, as other methods to mitigate the introduction of malicious code. So what does that kind of mean? It means you could have some system hardening, endpoint encryption, physical security controls. Maybe that transient cyber asset and removable media is in a cage and or it's locked up, and you have to have a key to get it access, and you have some key management around that. Other things could include administrative controls, or maybe vulnerability or malicious code scanning on the device itself before it's being used. For your transient cyber asset and removal media plan, some of the patterns that we have been seeing lately is a copy and paste from the standard saying that we will do this. And it's a copy and paste from the standard, and it's basically verbatim. You're gonna get asked questions. Be specific in your plan, specifically what other methods that you're using. We're gonna ask, and to that, this is what we're gonna do, but tell us how you're doing it as well in your plan, and then it'll just add that sustainability and consistency to your plan. Next. So here we have another slide up question. Again, no right or wrong answer. we just kind of want to get a pulse on if your entity allows third-party TCAs to be connected to your low-impact bed cyber systems or bed cyber systems. And how often are they being connected, if you know? Okay. All right. So monthly, quarterly, maybe you're looking you know, more like a defense in depth there, applying that hybrid method. Yearly, that's more manageable, right? That's probably for maintenance and testing. So good to know. I'm glad to see weekly was 0. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about TCAs managed by a party other than your organization. Before they connect, regardless of, well, let me back up. If your organization allows the use of transient cyber assets managed by another party, the party's methods must be reviewed prior to connecting to a bed cyber system. Additionally, your organization must determine if any additional mitigation actions are necessary and implement those actions. What I just said there, a lot of entities are missing in their plan. We see we don't allow third-party TCA use, or yes, we do. And if we do, we're going to do X, Y, Z. Okay, that's great. But again, I'll repeat, your organization must determine if any additional mitigation actions are necessary and implement those actions. That's got to be in your plan. We'll give an example of this. Let's say a contractor or a vendor is scheduled to come out and perform maintenance on equipment that's part of your bed cyber system, and they're going to be using their laptop. Now that's a transient cyber asset, right? Intended for short-term use. So in reviewing the contractor's laptop or vendors or whatever, the antivirus application is out of date. So you go to your plan and the plan says, hey, you know, look at these things. If they're not up to date, they can't connect. So you go back and say, hey, you know, you need to update your antivirus application, and also let's get those latest signatures and patterns installed as well. So he comes back and he does that, and we're going to go ahead and connect. But you know, you decide, well, since that AV hasn't been updated and it was out of date, maybe your organization may require the contractor or vendor just to perform a quick scan of that of their laptop and just make sure that, you know, why that was out of date, nothing snuck in there, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about determine if any additional mitigation actions are necessary. If you have to take that route, it's not a bad thing. We would rather see that you're taking those additional steps rather than just saying, oh yeah, we have a process, but we don't use it. We didn't need to use it. It's not a bad thing if you need to use it. It's a good thing. Next. All right, so removal media. Here again, you know, with the transient cyber assets and the way that the standard requirement is written, with TCAs, it provides some methods for you to use and then gives you the option for other methods. Removal media doesn't. It just says, you know what, detect and mitigate malicious code when you're using it. So typically what we see is we see transient cyber assets, scanning and removal media, you know, but if you detect malicious code, you're using a transient cyber asset, you plug in removal media, you detect malicious code, you have a whole other set of problems there, right? Hopefully the removal media is discarded and it's not used, and you go through another one and you can run an analysis on how malicious code got on the USB later, but not using it for forensic purposes and using another method to conduct the activity that removal media was intended to use. another way that we see is maybe that it's not a TCA, it's just basically a dumb device, like a laptop that has nothing else to do. Its main priority, it doesn't connect to the bed cyber system. Its main priority and function is just to scan for malicious code. We've seen that. We've also seen kiosks, TCA kiosks being used to scan removal media as well. But you know, hopefully with today's advancement in technology, removal media no longer needs to be connected directly to bed cyber systems. So if you use a bed cyber asset that is part of a bed cyber system to scan your removal media, you've earned yourself a meeting with WEX Enforcement and Mitigation Department. So let's not do that. And before I hand it over to Tyler, just some closing remarks. Stay vigilant with the use of your removal media and transient cyber assets being connected to your systems. Keep your plans updated with the current methods being deployed to mitigate the introduction of malicious code. Ensure your vendor, your contractors, and your employees aware of the current plan and the methods or any policies that you have, you know, specifically to bring your own device to work. So with that, I will hand it over to Tyler, and he was going to talk about some of the plan implementation artifacts and some recommendations for you folks as takeaways. Tyler, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. All right. Well, so far we've heard some good examples of what should be included in our plan. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit, like Jen said, and over the next several slides, we're going to talk about some good examples of how to implement your plan, right? There's the document, then there's the implement. And with implementation comes capturing evidence. We're going to cover a little bit at the end, some best practices as well that we typically see for both what to include in your plan as well as how to implement that plan. But first off, let's talk evidence, right? We often get asked, what type of evidence should we provide, right? That's a common question. And to answer that question, we're going to cover some examples a little more in depth, but kind of at a high level, if we're thinking about that question. Generally speaking, we look for both the appropriateness and sufficiency of the evidence. So it needs to be material, and there needs to be enough of it. And we're going to cover some of that in more detail in the next few slides, but just to keep that in mind as we run through these slides. So next slide, please. Okay, well, let's start out with a CEC. Now that's a little bit more rare to encounter a CEC. However, if you do, you'll want to retain as much documentation and information as you can for the event or the exception. And that could be, you know, a report or a form, a template, just however you want to capture the information. It needs to be documented somewhere. And the information that we're talking about here is basically everything listed there in the bullets. So what happened? When did it start? When did it end? You know, what's the scope of the assets or the BCS that were affected by the situation? And then, you know, what was the purpose or behind the declaration of the CEC? Were there any actions or measures taken during the event or after the event to help mitigate any risks of compromise? So that's just kind of an example of what we're looking for if you ever run into the situation where you need to declare a CEC. Okay, next slide. Let's get into some examples of evidence when you actually connect a TCA or an RM. This type of evidence you'll be capturing could vary depending on if you're using the TCAs in a continuous manner, or maybe you're using them in an on-demand manner, or a hybrid, kind of like Jen mentioned earlier. But for low inherent risk entities, you know, the most common form of evidence that we see is a security control checklist, or more often they're referred to as a TCA-RM checklist. And that's a little bit more associated with an on-demand management style of your TCA-RM, but we're gonna kind of talk through that here. And like any checklist, you know, as long as you build the correct things in it, and as you step through it, you'll be capturing the types of information that we like to see as auditors to get that reasonable assurance that the protections were afforded to the device before it was plugged in. And just a few things to note here with an antivirus scan. We want to see the version of the AV solution, as well as we want to see the results showing that a clean scan was performed. And of course, right, if there's not a clean scan, obviously don't plug it in. You'll want to first mitigate the vulnerabilities that were identified, and then simply just rescan it until it comes back clean. And then you'll want to capture that system generated evidence of the scan and use it in conjunction with the checklist. It just shores up that evidence there. So some quick examples of system generated evidence, you know, that term there, system generated, what does that actually mean? So what I'm talking about there is, you know, it could be a screenshot or a command line printout. It could be a configuration, a report or a log, something that comes directly from the TCA. Okay, next slide there. So here's some more examples. Now these ones, they're more geared towards continuously managing your TCAs in an ongoing manner. So you could be using, for example, group policies, whitelisting. You could be automatically pushing the antivirus updates from the network. There could be what we refer to as system hardening. So what is that? That it's additional controls essentially to reduce the risk footprint for that device. So think about, you know, reviewing logs on the device. Think about using a golden image or disabling Bluetooth and Wi-Fi before you plug in, and the list could go on with that. Okay, next slide. And the next one here, as we're getting to it, we're going to talk about third-party TCAs. I think that's on slide 109. Perfect, thank you. So we took a lot of this language directly from the standard measures. So in the standard, it gives you the requirement. After each requirement, it gives you a measure, basically examples of what types of evidence you could provide. So that's a lot of that you're seeing here on the slide. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but essentially, you know, the main takeaway here is the evidence you're gathering for this should be the documentation of the review that you're performing of the third party's controls, right? Because this is your vendor that's going to have these controls in place to manage their TCAs. So you're going to want to get eyes on what they're doing. It could be their AV update process, the most recent level of antivirus they're using. Maybe they're performing some whitelisting, or they'll let you view their live operating system. It could be system hardening again. So that evidence could be a variety of things depending on what you have in place with your third-party vendor. But the main thing is to capture all that information in a detailed and thorough manner. So we're going to now get into some of the examples of what that evidence could look like as far as checklist. So let's go on to the next slide here. So here it is. Here's the checklist example, and of course the information here is fictional. You know, we're not saying that you should use this format, but rather we're trying to give you an idea of what we sometimes see at audit. It's something that's commonplace. So for this one, you'll notice it's for a TCA. in the top left-hand corner. It's also authorized for a specific user. It has a specific date for the connection as well as disconnection, and then also for the use, right? And you'll see the protection methods are listed below in the table there. And at the bottom, you'll see an authorized date and signature. So those are all really good components of a checklist. There's notes there that are captured in the review assessment section. It's kind of more of the meat of the evidence. So it's whoever is performing the assessment is telling the auditor what they did, what they saw. So it looks like all the software is current, network restrictions were in place. The reviewer also attached the scan results of the antivirus scan, as well as a configuration report. So this is good evidence. This is typically what we would see entities provide. It's a good amount of detail, has all the right information. You'll see that this is a TCA managed by the entity, not the third party. In the top right-hand corner there, you'll see a not applicable marked for third party. That's how I was able to determine that. And then these next two slides are going to look similar, but they're for different usage. This next one's going to be an RM. So if we can move to that slide. So here you'll see it's an RM with the purpose to retrieve configuration settings for backup. Good idea there to have backup. And a lot of the same information is captured. However, you'll notice that a lot of the methods did not apply due to the capability of the RM versus a TCA. It kind of gets back to how Jen put it. You've got a smart device and then a device that's a little less smart, right? The important thing with an RM is the scan results, though. I will call attention to that and make sure to provide those scan results, right? That's the system generated evidence that I was talking about earlier. And in this case, it was scanned with the TCA. So it's also important to remember that you should not be using the BES cyber asset to scan your removable media. It needs to be a device other than the BES cyber asset. And typically the TCA is a good option, right? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, for the last example here, you'll notice that in the top right-hand corner, this one is a third-party transient cyber asset with the purpose of doing some relay maintenance work. A work order there is referenced, which is always good to reference IDs for associated evidence if the auditor ever wanted to see that. As well as you'll see the details of the review is captured there. One thing I notice here is there is a service level agreement on file. Typically with third parties, you'll have some sort of agreement or contract in place. I do want to call your attention to the bottom left-hand corner as well. So the last method listed there, it's titled Other Methods as Needed. This one's important to remember because like Jen said earlier, we commonly see entities struggle to capture the determination of additional mitigation actions that you should be performing. So after you're reviewing what the third party has in place for their controls, the next step would be to then, okay, is that enough security? Do we like what we're seeing? Do we need to put in any or take any other mitigating actions to make sure we, from a risk tolerance standpoint, we feel comfortable about plugging in this device into our cyber asset. So we want to make sure that that is documented somewhere. And often we see that entities don't determine that there's additional actions that need to take place because for the most part, third parties do a really good job of putting those controls in place. But the main thing to remember is to capture that, say something to the effect of there were no additional mitigations actions determined to be necessary or something similar to that effect. Okay, and then before we move on to the next, also wanted to highlight another common pitfall that we see with TCAs and RM. So sometimes we'll get attestations, as attestation evidence for using TCAs or RM. That just isn't going to cut it for evidence. If you are plugging in the device, right, we want to see more. We want to see evidence of the review that took place for what controls were in place in the review. So attestations are, I will say they're acceptable pretty much only if you did not experience a CEC, for example, or if you did not connect a TCA, did not connect an RM during the monitoring period, then that would be an appropriate time to create an attestation, and of course, be sure to have your SIP senior manager sign and date that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I believe this is our final slide out question for the presentation here. So, does your entity have a method to track the use of TCA or RM connected to your low impact BCS? And again, this is more of a pulse check, right? There's no right or wrong answer. So just throw something out there. Okay, 13 responses, not bad. It seems to be going up and down there, but it's about 2/3 say you do, and then the other third, not sure. Not bad. Room for improvement, I think, but that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this outreach event. You know, if you did answer, I don't know, then we'd recommend you revisit that part of your program to how you're managing those devices. You know, it's hard to protect something when you don't know how many devices you have or how often they're being connected. So that's something that is kind of foundational to your TCA-RM program. And if you don't have that in place, go figure it out, and make sure to use your resources and go talk to some people in your organization to figure out what's going on. Okay, next slide. Okay, next up, we just want to touch briefly on some recommendations for both the documented plan as well as implementation. And this slide focuses on what to include in your plan. What would be a good idea to include there, and when you're fleshing out your plan, what should you put in it? You want to include, you know, how does your entity manage its TCA and RM, in what manner? It could be ongoing, on demand, or hybrid, and all of them are acceptable. And I don't think there's one better way to do it over another. That will vary depending on who you talk to, and also it kind of just varies according to your business circumstances and your risk appetite, and all of those good things. So something else you'll want to include is some acceptable uses for the devices. Now, it does give some examples in the definition of a transient cyber asset. We listed some here on the slide for you. And then also you want to list controls that you have in place, or maybe it's controls that you are working to put in place to ensure that the devices are not connected for more than 30 consecutive calendar days. That kind of gets back to the definition. If it does happen to be connected for longer than that, then it becomes part of that BES cyber system, and you'll have to afford all the other controls that come with that. So you want to make sure that there's some controls in place for that. And then also, what do you do when a CEC is declared? You know, we like to see that kind of in a procedure format within your plan. It could be part of the plan, it could be a supporting document to the plan, but the main thing is to have procedural steps in place for if that is declared, now what are we doing? And then obviously you want to make sure you review your plan often to keep up with any threats, technology, or just simply changes in the standard, right? We do have SIP 3 version 9 that was recently approved, and that's going to be effective on April 1, 2026. So something to keep in mind when reviewing your plans for this next update. Okay, next slide. All right, and now we're getting into some recommendations for implementation. This is kind of more from a quality assurance perspective, right? It's important to remember to maintain an accurate inventory, right? If you don't have one, first step, inventory. Next step, you want to check in periodically to make sure it's still accurate, to that those devices are still there, whether they're on the shelf out at your site, or maybe they're at corporate office being regularly plugged in. Wherever they're at, make sure it's still accurate. And if you need to commission a new device or decommission one, sometimes those changes sneak up on you. Another thing to keep in that we like to recommend is to do periodic internal audits or assessments, just to ensure that your controls are working as intended, that you're consistently capturing the evidence, and that everything's running smoothly there. Okay, next slide. And last but not least, for the third-party TCAs, we just wanted to mention a resource that is listed in the guidelines and technical basis section of the standard. So this points to a DOE document, and it really just, it includes some example procurement language that you could consider using when you're drafting up service level agreements or contracts. And of course, the purpose there is to really embed the cybersecurity from the very beginning of the cyber asset lifecycle. So recommend you take a look at that if you have time. Okay, next slide. And I believe this is the last recommendation, and save the best for last, right? I think this one's really important to say, right? And stay connected, be involved, right? There's a lot that's going on in the NERC compliance space, and there's ways to get involved with the next versions of the standards, through comments and balloting, as well as there's ways to increase your knowledge and expertise in all things compliance through these webinars, for example, or in other outreach events like this one. We encourage you to sign up for the WEC newsletter if you haven't already. That's a great resource, and it sends a notification right to your email for upcoming events and outreach. And also, WEC has published some really useful internal controls guidance to help entities avoid any potential failure points when it comes to compliance. And you can find those on our website if you do a simple search for them. And again, if you have any specific questions for SIP standards, please email us. We're more than happy to have a quick phone call conversation as well, and get our SMEs and your SMEs online and talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of security, right? We love that stuff. We love working one-on-one with entities, and we'd rather talk with entities in a proactive manner rather than waiting for a monitoring activity to come along. And rather, it's always better to take that proactive approach rather than guessing and waiting. So with that, again, please reach out. Happy to take questions, and that's our email there, sip@wec.org. We also link the next version of the standard for your reference, and then we can go to the next slide here. There's a reference page here, some additional references that will help you out for those who are still coming up to speed with compliance, who maybe aren't familiar, as familiar as they should be with NERC and WEC. And with that, I'll say we're happy and ready to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Jen and Tyler. I am not seeing any questions.